Okay. So we the first four chapters we talked about started with the soul, and we emphasized how there was one unit. We went through all the functions. We narrowed our interest to the appetitive faculty. That's the fact that the whole emotional structure of the human being. So this use of soul, of course, is really more, I don't want to say literally, but it's more physical. It's about the human being as such, not about the spiritual, what we usually think of the spiritual neshama that is different from us. Okay. And we talked about its functions. We narrowed it down to the emotional structure as the object of our interest. And then we had these two chapters, chapter 3 and 4, where the Rambam gives us the progression of the development of character, of the emotional structure. Okay. And now we come to the fifth chapter, which we'll now say as follows: Haperak HaChamishi, B'shimush b'kochos hanefesh l'tachlis achas. That the whole capacity of the human soul and everything that a person does tends towards one goal. Okay, so let's see how it goes. All right, here we go. Let me put on the share screen here. Share screen.
And did you do it through
Yeah, it's recording. Right. Okay. Ro'il adam laha'avid kochos nafsho kulam. A person should employ all the capacities of his soul, kulam lafi hadas, according to a planned program. Kafi she'ikdamnu b'perek she'asher lifnei zeh. Below simla neged einav tachlis achas. He ultimately has only one goal. V'hi hasogas Hashem yispo'er v'yisromein. Kafi yecholes ha'adam. Ritzoni lomar yediaso. There is only one goal that we aim to. We'll comment afterwards. Let's just let him speak, okay? There is only one goal to aim to, and that's the apprehension of God up to the maximal human capacity that we know him. Knowing him not only means that we know that he exists and like we take a course in philosophy, it means that we know him in a very direct sense. I'll speak about that in a moment, okay? And at the end, everything he does, his movements, his resting, even his speaking, so that it doesn't happen that in the actions of the human being, there was be nothing that is simply wasted, empty. Namely, there will not be an action that is either done without any thought, with no purpose, or with a wrong purpose. All right. Mashal zeh, and now he now gets down to a few details. Sheyosim hakavano ba'achilaso ushasiyaso. He shall place his intention in eating and drinking, ube'ilaso, in the sexual relations, ushnaso, sleeping, yikitzaso, when he's awake, tenuaso, menuchaso, sort of doublets, right? His movement and his resting. Brius gufo bovad. All of this has a goal, and that is of a healthy body. V'hakavana b'brius gufo, shetimotze hanefesh keleho briim. The soul will find that its tools, namely the body, the limbs of the body, it will find them healthy. Ushleimlim lemos bechachmos. So, namely, it's the old, the pithy saying is, healthy body produces healthy mind. Namely, you're not going to strive with great intellectuality, okay, if indeed your body is not in good shape. Yes, true, we know examples of that. I mean, especially, what is it, Stephen Hawking is like almost a counterexample. But the point is, he's almost the exception that proves the rule. They're so outstanding. Normally, in order to be able to work, to struggle intellectually, one has to be at a certain level healthy. And as far as the Rambam is concerned, he has to also be ethical. Has to have, as we'll see in a moment. Ushleimim le'achos b'chochmos v'liknos ma'alos hamidos. That is the excellences in character, ma'alos hasichlios, and also the intellectual excellences. Ad shetagia loso tachlis. All of this is going towards one goal. V'alzeh ha'hakesh, on this analogy, or lo yechaven ozel hana'o belvad. Ad sheyivchar min hama'achal v'hamishter hayoser orev. It turns out that if one thinks in these terms, one does not pick all the time the food and the drink that is most pleasant. Okay? And everything else that one does not always look for the most pleasing. Rather, that which is useful and useful in our context for ultimate character and intellectual development. I mean, if it turns out that what one is eating or drinking is pleasant, go for it, no problem. But if it turns out it's good for you, and even though it doesn't agree with your palate, let's say, it should be of no account to you, because your goal in all of this is external to what you're doing. Now it's quite conceivable that one seeks out the pleasant in a particular circumstance. A person will do it for medicinal purposes. For example, a person all of a sudden loses appetite, and that might lead to an injury in one's health. So therefore, so then you're looking for pleasant and tasty food to re-arouse the appetite that one eats healthily and eats enough. Similarly, in his overall alav marash charo, if a person gets into a depression, you see Rabbi Shmiya Shirim, listening to music, to songs, Umine Neginos, and to music, Ubetiyul Beganos, Ubebinyonim Noim, and going into beautiful gardens and beautiful architecture, Ubishiva Imsuros Daos, and even in the company of beautiful women, turns out, one that sort of stimulates the soul, that one removes from it the depression. If you'll notice, namely, the Rambam is only interested, if you look carefully, he's only interested in ornamental art and music, simply to create pleasant atmosphere. Rambam did not like Plato. The Rambam did not believe in poetry. Aristotle did, but Plato did not. The Rambam does not, as an end in itself. He's only listening to music simply to relieve a depression, but he sees no value in lyrics and music and poetry and all of these things. He does not see them as values in and of themselves. Namely, he doesn't see an art, the art that imitates or that creates. That's not important to him. To him, all of the indulgence in all of this cultural activity is, you might call, ornamental, or it's a way of it is therapeutic, it is as therapy, okay? That he will heal his body. Why does a person want to be healthy? That he will then be able to pursue the true intellectual pursuits. Ultimately comes to knowledge of God. V'chein kasher yanua v'yisaseh b'kniyas hamon, when a person struggles to make a living. Tehiyah tachliso b'kitzvo oso sheyishtabeh bo yishtamesh bo lema'alos. The purpose of having the money is two things. One is to support oneself, okay? The other is to develop one's character using money, namely in the sense of generosity, etc. V'shiyim soehu l'kiyum gufo v'hemshech mitziuso ad sheyasig v'yeda mehashem ma she'efshar ledato. All what we consider to be ordinary derech eretz, all ordinary human activity is dedicated to one purpose: to create a human being that is capable to ascend a ladder of realization of the intellect. You have to remember that in the first parak, in the first chapter, the Rambam insisted that the one thing that distinguishes the human being from all other living beings is the intellect. Therefore, the only way that one truly expresses one's humanity is by employing the intellect. And the intellect is what? Is only in potential, and the idea is to bring it to actuality, is to develop the intellect that it knows, and the highest knowledge is of things that do not change. That is God Himself. Okay, that's the highest knowledge, and therefore everything.
Isn't that Rambam? יסוד האמונה בדעת. כל הזמן he push this point. יסוד האמונה בדעת. And then
the opening of the Mishnah Torah. That's the opening of the Mishnah Torah. Yes. Yeah, that's the opening of the Mishnah Torah. But here, remember, there's no Mishnah Torah yet. This is the preparatory work. Correct. Okay. All right. Va'al zeh hahekesh yihiyeh lemlechas harufua mavo gadol b'ma'alos b'diyas Hashem u'b'hasig ha'atzlacha ha'amitis. Knowledge of medicine, namely knowledge of what is required for health of the human body, has a great role in the ultimate human purpose. V'yihiu limudah v'drishasa avodah menhu avodos hagadolos. Namely, of the many crafts and professions that exist, the medical one has a higher standing. It has a higher standing because it helps develop the human. It makes the human being develop. It doesn't just provide a need. It's actually a guide along a path of development. We will evaluate the things that we do, and you see, that's the catch. Well, the things that we do will be of human character because they're directed to a goal. Okay, this is a contrast to the animal. If a person will eat something that seems to be delicious, smells wonderful, correct? A real gourmet. But at the end of the day, what he eats, it doesn't help and it may even injure. It might actually put one in danger, whether immediate or down the road. He's such a person who eats only as in that sense of pleasure. That person is indistinguishable from an animal. That's not a human activity that expresses the essence of what it means to be a human being. Namely, he's part of the animal kingdom. In that sense, the act that he's doing is an act that is part of the animal kingdom, as it says in Tehillim, Nimshal kabahemos nidmu. When does it become a genuinely human activity to eat something good or whatever? Well, a human activity. If he only eats what's good for his health. If a person has the capacity to put aside what is most desirable and pleasant, even if he doesn't want to eat it, even if it's disgusting to him. But if it's what he has to do to improve, that's what he does. Namely, it's done by direction. That's how a human being is distinguished from other living beings. If a person indulges in sexual activity, whenever the desire pushes him, with no thought of consequences or purpose, like an animal, it's just driven by instinct and by impulse. He says, so we're not even talking about that kind of person. He says, but it might be that we're speaking about a person who's a step up. Suppose a person actually lives by this, does everything proper for his body, the way we described. However, a person can either be a hypochondriac, so he really does only what he needs, or as modern people say, my body is a temple. They won't eat anything that's injurious. Okay, all of a sudden the health is completely an end in itself, not a means to an end. At the end of the day, that is not the excellent human being. Namely, it's one pleasure. The way that this fellow chose to emphasize health, okay, there is a difference. He's saying, you see, there is a difference that this person's behavior is directed, at least, not only instinctual and impulsive. But at the end of the day, what he chose was a pleasure, a physical pleasure. None of these have a final, ultimate end in themselves. Everything that he does, he has to keep his body as perfect as possible. Why? They are the true limbs of the body, the ultimate ones. Namely, the healthy body frees one to develop oneself in character and in intellect. Okay? We're going to go a step further up, but that's still not what we're after. Everything that a person will know from the sciences and from the world of knowledge, those that are really directed to the ultimate intellectual pursuit, we don't have to discuss those. Namely, physics and metaphysics in the classical curriculum, they are knowledge of the world as it is. That's what we're really after. Okay, the principles of existence that do not change. There's still preparatory material. Algebra, okay? The Sefer Chatachei HaChevut, that's the book Conic Sections by Apollonius, okay? The conic sections produce the circle, the parabola, the hyperbola, the ellipses, okay? But Tachbulos, I thought Tachbulos meant is referring to Archimedes' book on pulleys, the study of pulleys. v'haribui b'she'elos ha'handasa, engineering. U'mishichas hamishkalim. Over here, the way this guy is translating mishichas hamishkalim is probably pulleys. V'harbei kayotze b'zeh. Now at the bottom, I had what's his name? He translated a little different. Okay, here's what I have here. Well, the first I translated as tachbelos is what we call mechanics. Sheilos handasa is like geography and engineering. By geography, we're not geometry and engineering. And mishichas hamishkalim is pulleys, right? Moving weights, right?
Yeah.
How to do it using fulcrums and things like that. Okay, studying that. That develops the capacity to reason, okay? You learn how to give demonstrations, proofs, okay? Till a person learns how to make true analogies, true arguments that ultimately become demonstrations. So the point is, there are theoretical studies that are not the true end in themselves, but they are preparatory. Okay, at the ultimate end of the road of these preparatory, till a person comes to the establishment of the truth of God existence. A person who a person's human speech. A person's speech should be limited only to what is purposeful. O b'chachma, o b'ma'ala, o b'shvach ma'ala, o me'ula, o b'gnus pechisus o pachos. Okay, pachus, I guess. All right, a person's speech should always be that which is necessary, namely to accomplish something or to push away something, or one should speak in wisdom or in character traits or in the praise of these things, or even in negative discussion about these things. Ki giduf ba'alei hachesronos, because dissing people of people who do not have, who are people without quality, v'ginui zichram. If ha'isah kavanobo lachasrom ha'itzel b'nei adam kadei sheyivasru mehem v'lo sheyasu k'maaseihem, if the idea is to convince other people not to do poor practices, evil things, then harei ze nitzrach, it's necessary, v'harei hi malo, and then one is allowed to do it. Okay, I mean, we're usually a bit suspicious of people who indulge in this, who are experts on, Yenner's from Kai. It's like I used to have in the Musanikas. I remember back in the yeshiva days. Pavush Reitman Shema Yisrael. Why do you say Shema Yisrael out loud? As Yenner Zoharen, that the other guy should hear it. He used to say, the cynical Balei Musar. Or as I used to say, very often I used to say, if you look at the Rosh Chodesh bench, the first we ask is, Chaim Sheyesh Bahem Yirah Shamayim. At the very end of the shopping list, all of a sudden, Chaim Shtahevonu Avas Torah Yirah Shamayim. Okay, so we're a little suspicious of that in human behavior, so to say. But the Rambam, I mean, he was serious. Halotira Amro Yisale Kamasei Eretz Mitzrayim Chamei Sei Eretz Canaan Lo Sasu V'Sipur HaSodomiim V'Chol Ma Sheba B'Mikra B'Gnus HaAnashim Ba'alei Chesronos V'Gnus Zichram, everything in the Torah about evil people, that we discuss their behavior and we show how bad it is. U'Shvach HaTovim V'Hagdolasam Abdor HaKavanobo Masha Zacharti Kilach. Okay, indulgent to that kind of speech has to be really limited.
So what he means here? Bad mouthing, bad deeds. So in order that you rectify
That
your
other people, namely, if you're trying to instruct, impress upon other people to stay away from bad deeds, and you end up mentioning how bad people came to a bad end, like in the Torah, he gives the Torah as an example. So you have to just imitate the Torah.
yeah,
You can't go further. No, there's no indulgence. This is not a heter for lashon hara. No, about somebody. That's for sure. Okay. The standards here are quite high, so to say the least.
Not of the Rambam. What do you want?
Yes, of course. If a person will always keep in mind this purpose, he will end up not being so active, not so hyper. He'll calm him down, and he won't even have to talk so much. A person who directs all his activities that they serve a purpose of the knowledge of God, lo yisorer, he will not be aroused to stop putting gold leaf all over his walls, or gold threads in his clothes. The most that he will intend is the most a person indulges in ornamental luxury is to keep the mind expanded and sort of upbeat and optimistic. If you notice, this quote doesn't appear in two places. It's a combination of quotes that appeared in two places. The Rambam must have said it in his memory and just put it down. Okay, they're pretty much the same. But the point is, the issue is a person has to have an open, upbeat mind if one wishes to really scale the true heights. And in that only in that context, okay, do we see a person indulging in sort of an ornamental pleasure. A person is exhausted from intellectual effort, activity, in the same way, the same way the body requires rest, the same way at a certain level, the intellect is exhausted and now has to be sort of, refreshed. And he's still talking about the body. To give the senses a rest. The way the Chachamim used to say, the Gemara tells stories about people who were just too exhausted for learning. Okay. So one story I remember is one of the Amoraim is exhausted. So he says, what I'll do is he doesn't go into the base medrash. It's too much for him. So he'll sit outside, and when the students will come out, at least he'll stand up for them and give them their acheret. So that's how he'll get some schar. He'll get some reward. He doesn't want to waste his time, chas v'shalom. But he'll wait till they come out, and then he'll stand. So, of course, they come out and they ask, he says, what went on inside, of course. And then ultimately, it's quite clear that he knows as much as the students know anyway. So, all right. The Chechal Shirabana Megirsa. V'karov hadavar she'al zehu ofen lo yuelo l'ros v'lo pulos hevel. These are not empty behavior. This is not empty behavior. In this sense, V'tzoni lamar his overrus la'asos ha'pituchim v'akitushim b'binyonim v'b'kelim v'b'godim. You got to understand, the Rambam in the Islamic culture, there was no art for itself. There was only ornamental art. And the ornamental art had no figures, no reality. It was those geometric figures, etc. Okay. One of the most impressive parts when we visited in Spain when we went to Toledo, and in the Transito Synagogue, you saw the leftovers of all the engravings on the wall. It was gorgeous. There were leftovers, and it was all psukim, all the psukim. The psukim, that constituted the ornament in the shul, just all the way around, okay? And it's quite clear that that shul was built to last 1,000 years.
The arabesque.
Yeah, arabesco is called, right, thank you, right. Okay, so this is what the Rambam is referring to, that this type of ornament, you come in and it feels good, and the mind expands, and now you can go ahead. All right, so now he put out a quite ambitious, what seems to be an ambitious program, and he's quite aware as to how ambitious it is. V'da, no. Ki zos hamadrega, hi madrega el yona ma'od, v'kasha, v'lo yasiguho elo ma'at, v'acharei hergel gadol ma'od. Okay. When I find a person who really is a living version of this whole program, I will not say that this guy is below the level of the prophets. If you look in the beginning of chapter 7 in Hilchos Yisodei HaTorah, where he gives a definition of the Nevuah, he describes a person that is an elevated version of what's exactly here. But it starts with what's here, and it elevates up to that level where, and he says, and at the highest level, he says, Miyad nachara lo ruach hakodesh. It's almost part of human nature that a person already reaches that level of ruach hakodesh.
Isn't that the Gaon Ravina said the same thing? That
Who?
is, nowadays we don't have Nevi'im, and really the Ruach HaKodesh, if you're really spiritual, it's equivalent to Nevuah. I mean,
No. The Rambam
unquote.
says it's impossible. Nowadays, we don't have it because the circumstances in which we live are simply incapable of producing this kind of person. This kind of person obviously has to live in an extremely stable environment that one can get away with this. I mean,
because
this person that he's discussing is married, correct? He's raising children. He's raising a family. He's doing all of these things. And nonetheless, he's capable of pulling his emotional structure together to reach this high level. So we're talking about a very, it presupposes, at least presupposes a stable existence. And the Rambam mentions that explicitly is why we have no Nevuah now. That's his appropriate. It's in the Morah. It's not here. It's in the Morah. Okay.
I thought Gaon Ravina, really, the way I read it, it seems like Gaon Ravina speaking, you know. He says there is no Nevuah today, but Ruach HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he gave it to you, is a very, very highly important.
The Rambam is not talking about that at all. Not talking about that at all, yeah. Okay. But the way the later generations use the phrase Ruach HaKodesh and all of that is quite different from the original sense that's in the Rambam.
Okay.
You know, culturally, the words shift in culture and how they look at it. In the Rambam, it's not that at all. Okay, you'll see when you look at the beginning of chapter 7, you'll see what he describes. Okay, so he says, I don't say this person is less than Nevi'im. Ritzoni lomar shehu yanhid kochos nafsho kulam v'yosim tachlusom Hashem yisale levad. V'lo yaseh ma'aseh gadol v'lo katom v'lo yedaber milah elo im zeh ha'ma'aseh o zeh hadibur yaviu el ma'ala o el ma sheyavi lema'ala. You know, he spoke about the preparatory studies, remember? V'hu yachshov v'yizbonem b'chol ma'aseh u'tnuah v'yir'eh ha'mevihu el ha'tachlis hahi o eino meviu oz yaseh. That's the kind of, so he's talking about a rare individual, indeed. Okay. However, even though the possibilities of such an individual is rare, God demands it from all of us. Okay, all right. This is very. You're obligated to push this road, and we know what the probabilities are of succeeding. Correct. He demanded that this is what we go to. Can you imagine? We say this twice a day. We're putting up the standard in front of our heads, right? Twice a day. And we know how many people are going to get there. Oh, doesn't mean with the full, isn't referring to full strength. It is with all the capacities that you have. So that means you take all the capacities of the soul, and they are directed now towards one goal. ושתשים תכליס כל חלק ממנו תכליס אחת, והיא לאהבוס השם. וכבר זיזו הנביאים עליהם השלום גם זהו עניין. The prophets spoke to this purpose. ואמרו בכל דואהו דואהו, בכל דרכיך דואהו. ופירשו חכמים ואמרו, ואפילו בדבר עבירה. There is such a phrase like that in Chazal. Everybody wants to know what Chazal means, and everybody wants to know what the Rambam means, okay? It's obviously, it's obviously an exaggeration. Everybody's always trying to figure out what kind of case is this. I don't think of it that way. I think of it that the point is a person's complete behavior is with this purpose. He's always struggling, and every now and then, for whatever reason, it goes awry. Don't worry about it. Okay. He says the Chachamim gave a pithy formulation of this whole chapter. Okay. And they discussed the whole thing ad ma'od. Until if you really go through how pithy the statement is, how few words they use. This topic has written big, great compositions, and those compositions haven't exhausted the topic. Nonetheless, this pithy statement of the Chachamim taken the whole thing. And you should know, it is already written with a divine power. That contains the whole paragraph, the whole chapter, okay? And everything we aim for. Okay. So that's the chapter, all right? Well, let's see, I don't want to do that. I want to stop the share. Okay, here we go. We're back. Okay, so now we ready. He spoke. Okay, so there are a lot of things to take out of this. Number one, now we know why in the first chapter he made all this noise that seemingly was semantic about that there was one soul. Remember, there was sort of a semantic argument. There's a vegetative soul, a living soul, and then the human soul. And he kept saying, no, it's a soul, it's one unified soul with many functions, all right? It's a unified soul with many functions. Now you know why. Because since the soul, a human being does not have three independent souls, I can't force one soul to do the work of another one, right? But if it's a unified soul, I can direct the whole complete human existence, the human personality, to do what? To go towards one purpose, That's the first thing we get out of it. Second thing we get out of that is the following. That when we talked about the middle road and how there is a preventative tilt towards one side in each character trait, we noted that the Rambam, and we said that the whole goal of this whole program was to have an unencumbered personality, that a man is the ruler of his passions, and therefore now you understand you can direct everything that you do to one goal, the knowledge of God, because indeed your passions don't rule you. They don't misdirect you. They don't misdirect you to other purposes. You can use all your capacities. That's what's emphasized here. And also, the passions don't mislead you as to what reality is. That's how we understood it. Eliezer Schweid adds something to it. He says, in each character trait, what's the meaning of the middle road? In each character trait, too little, all right, you won't be healthy enough in order to do what you have to do in order to grow intellectually, to develop. Too much means that in that character trait, you'll turn that character trait into a means to an end. You'll turn the character trait into a means to an end. That's how he looks at it. So that's how he understands, in light of this chapter, what the middle road is. That's number one. Here's another point, excuse me. When the Rambam spoke about the preventative tilt in the 4th chapter, he said that in theory, Hasidim everywhere always tilt a little, a preventative tilt, because human character is that you always tilt towards one extreme in a character trait, so there's a slight preventative measure. However, when he said you don't have to worry about that because the mitzvahs of the Torah cover that preventative tilt, if you recall, he described that the mitzvahs of the Torah push you almost to the opposite extreme. In this chapter, you understand why. Because what he wants is he only wants you to indulge in things, only what is necessary for development, not as an end in itself, not just simply to be able to stay on the middle road. Only when he starts telling you how much money you have to give away, and matnos aniyim, right, and lecha shicham peah, then the shmita and yovel and all of that we kill the acquisitive character of a human being. What he's really after is that you only earn money just enough for your needs, and now all your direction is heading elsewhere. It's heading towards the highest knowledge possible, okay? That explains that, at least that's the way I understand it. That explains the way he described the tilt in general, a slight tilt in general in the theory. He incorporated that into the theory, but he said in Torah, the Torah sometimes pushes you all the way, almost to the other extreme, not just a slight tilt. The phraseology there is very striking. He says that the 2 examples he gives is money and sensuality. Okay? He knows what he's talking about. All right? Okay. The next thing is the idea, when you read, the question is, how did Aristotle, the Rambam has taken this Aristotelian theory and really turned it to his purposes. Because in Aristotle, the cultivation of certain character traits are ends in themselves. Aristotle discusses friendship. He discusses generosity. He discusses, now, of course, the highest knowledge he discusses courage. All of these are ends in themselves. They're part of good, the happy human existence, the good life, okay? Excuse me. He considers there's a hierarchy, and the highest one is the intellectual heights that a person can come to, the knowledge of God. But there are many that are value within themselves. The Rambam is a religious person, just pushes all of that aside. There is only one purpose. None of that has ultimate, final meaning in and of itself. Tough to swallow, and that's why there's so few people who measure up to this level. Okay, no question. The phrase "Yidiyas Hashem," okay, that's a tricky business. And in Tanakh, Yedias Hashem, most often, especially in the Nevi'im, where they talk about Yedias Hashem, they're talking about the knowledge of His behavior. the famous verse excuse me for a second. The famous verse in Yirmiyah, which we conclude the Haftarah from Tisha B'Av, right? Gibor b'gvuraso, etc. Haskel v'yadoa osi, knowledge of me. What is that? Ki ani Hashem aseh chesed tzedakah mishma b'chol haaretz, ki b'elech hafatzti. All right. So the whole point is the key doesn't mean because, it means that. Yediat Hashem is the knowledge of what He does. Okay. It's not so much the existential knowledge that is being described here. Okay, it's the knowledge of His midos. All right, the knowledge of His midos, and that's how the Nevi'im look at it. Here, the Rambam has taken it to theoretical knowledge. Okay, to theoretical knowledge. At the end, it will come back to a certain degree to what the Nevi'im say, as I'll mention. Now, over here, he does not discuss what the Yedias Hashem is, okay? And like we mentioned earlier, he describes the opening. You have to remember, always remember that the Rambam held Yedias Hashem as a mitzvah. Knowledge of God is a mitzvah, of His existence, and of the fact that He's one, etc. Knowledge of things is a mitzvah because the Rambam understood that is within the human being's capacity to know these things. And it's what distinguishes a human being, and therefore we can command a human being to do it. Okay, other people, we talked about that. Can you call it a mitzvah or not? The Rambam insisted it's a mitzvah. Leda is not simply to take a course in college and know the proof of existence of God. You're not yotze with that. And in fact, the Rambam right when he talks about the mitzvah, he gives a short proof. He's talking about active cognition. That whatever the knowledge consists of, a person is engaged in that knowledge. There's a famous mashal that was used by all the philosophers who discussed theories of knowledge at that time. They talked about a scribe who knows how to write, but is not writing. So his knowledge in writing is potential. You know the existence of God, yeah, potential, you know He's there. But to actually engage intellectually, that is another act. That's pretty difficult to define. And in the Moreh, what comes out is that God is and gives a radical sense in the sense that God is unknowable. So the only thing we truly can know is His creation. And the level of our knowledge of His creation, that's how much we can say we know Him. That's the only information that's available. Okay. If you look at the Rambam, you'll see that the Rambam, we already had a hint of it, and we're at an early stage in his career. The mitzvos here have not been described as ends in themselves. The Rambam held that knowledge of the Bria is what we call usually Chachmas HaTorah, the knowledge of the halacha. The Rambam did not consider the knowledge of the halacha as an end in itself. You recall, we read that. He was against endless analysis of the Sugyas HaTalmud. He said the reason we have the expanded Talmud discussions is that we know what to do and what not to do. As soon as we know, right? We read that introduction to the Sefer HaMitzvos, where he says the purpose of all those discussions is to know what to do, what not to do. Okay, and it's clear that what he wants is that the Torah, and here he describes the Torah as preparatory, as training, as instrumental in developing character. So all of that is instrumental character in Yedias Hashem. It turns out it's not. Was not appreciated, needless to say, by later authorities. and people who thought that the philosophy misled, but he actually held that the Chochmas Habriya is the highest knowledge that we have. And in fact, after the Rambam discusses the metaphysics, where he says what we have to say about God, the first thing he talks is about Ahavas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. And Ahavas Hashem is to know the world he created. And he has 2 chapters giving a pithy summary of physics and metaphysics of the Middle Ages as he had it. It's kind of astounding. You read those 2 chapters, it's all summarized over there. So it's a completely different view. All of that, of course, is not here, because all of that here is only the ethics, the character traits, the preparatory exercises that we have to go through, that all our efforts are for, that prepare us to climb these heights in the knowledge of God. Okay, I mean, that's it. And then the rest is spinned out in his later writings, okay? Here he only discussed the preparatory stage. I mentioned that what I want to do next time, I want to read Hilchos Deos, where he comes back to this material and he ends up formulating it differently. So just this weekend, I read from Rabbi Lichtenstein that he felt when the Rambam wrote Hilchos Deos, he sort of matured a bit. That he had one view here in the commentary to the Mishnah, he was younger. And when he wrote Hilchos Deos, he was a little older and he sort of saw it differently. I'm not so sure about that, at least in this part anyway. I have a different understanding. So we'll talk about it. He says these things differently. We also pointed out that in his later writings, even in his commentary to Avos, he contradicted himself on details about the middle road. We mentioned that, okay? Right. So we'll look at the Hilchos Deos next time. We'll do a little of it just to see how different a formulation it is, and try to explain it. And it becomes kind of, you have to learn how to read, so to say. So it's a good exercise, okay, in reading the 2 things. So we'll do this next time.
Don't you say? Okay, another time. I see the refining Divrei Yirmiyahu. Askel v'yado otid. That's really what Rambam pushing it a little bit higher, and then he's splitting between Yira and Ava v'chule. It's already Yirmiyahu say it. That Hashem. Okay,
yeah, but they had
tell me
the
how
point is
usually
in context. If you read the Nevi'im, if you use Das Hashem, for example, in Hosea, and all of these places, it's usually closely associated with behavior, not theoretical knowledge. That's
but in order to have even behavior, you must in your intellect to understand that you're convinced to do the right thing. There is
the point is, I think the point is that we're 800 years down the road from the Rambam, so we can't imagine this sort of stuff differently. It's hard to go back. I think if you read the scholars on Das Elohim and stuff like that, you won't find the theoretical reasoning about the Ribono Shel Olam. You won't find that.
No, that's
because in the culture, that's how it showed up. Our culture, we can't imagine doing things without having this intellectual background in the knowledge of God. And that's the accomplishment of the Rambam. No matter how much everybody complained about the Rambam, that's a major accomplishment on his part. And in that, you're 100% correct, without question. The only question is, what existed in the culture of the Nevi'im, that when they used these phrases, to what were they referring? In Mishlei and Hosea and Yirmiyah, I don't think you find it that much. I know in Hosea and Yirmiyah you find it. I don't recall it sticking out in my head like from Yeshaya or Yechezkel. I don't find it that as much the way, especially in Hosea and Yirmiyah. So in that sense, the question is, what did they have? What we have is clearly the Moreshet of Sadia and the Rambam and all of those people, no question. I agree with you on that.
Thank you very much. Yasher koach.
Okay,
Yofi.
all right. Be well, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, Isaac. It was
Okay.
wonderful.
okay.